All right. Thank you guys for joining me. Thank you for joining Marriage Grind. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's BW underscore the marriage guy. Also, check out the website, bwthemarriageguy.com. Great resources on there. Today, I have an exciting couple, very vibrant, and they're doing amazing things in the community of marriage. Please give it up for Tony and Alisa DiLorenzo. How you guys doing?
Doing
Great.
great, Bruce.
Awesome. Good to see you.
Good to
So
see
you
you
know
too.
what? The funny thing is, we connected on Instagram.
Yes.
And I saw a lot of the things you guys were doing, and I saw the powerful things, but I also saw the testimony. And I think when I was actually looking at your YouTube channel, there was a time where you guys were going through a hard, difficult time in your marriage. You were actually on the brink of divorce. You want to tell me a little bit about that and how that started?
Yeah, so we were married at that point 11 years,
Wow.
and we had a 5 and a 2-year-old. And we just had learned, or just had gone to a point where we were just disconnected. Emotionally, sexually, financially, we were decent. And so we were about to lead a small group study at our church.
Wow.
And Elise and I had began talking about that. And the one thing that I really wanted to talk about was sex.
Yeah.
And Alisa,
So he calls me up one day and says, "Hey, I think we should do our next small group study on sex." And I remember looking at the phone going, "But we aren't having sex. Like, what are we going to talk about, right?" Because we were so disconnected. I'm thinking, "Are you kidding?" I remember looking at the phone going, "Are you kidding me?" And, in kind of that sarcastic wife way, I'm like, "Fine, find me something that I can present and, we'll go with it." So he brings this book home and we're talking about it. And then we're watching a news clip. Some of our friends, the kids were on the Today Show, and the article or the segment right after that was talking about these couples who had done these crazy sex challenges.
Yeah.
Right? And one couple did like a year of sex, and one couple did 101 days of sex. And the big idea guy sitting right next to me is like, "Hey, that small group study that we're doing on sex, it's going to be, 8 weeks. So that works out to be 60 days. So what if we had 60 days of sex?" And I was just like, no. I mean, it wasn't even a consideration. Just
Right.
not going to happen because, like Tony said, our kids were 2 and 5.
Right.
And
at that point in time, we were having sex maybe once a month,
maybe.
and so this was a stretch. And so Elisa, honestly, I mean, I brought this up, and she just said no. And many of us have felt rejection.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we shut down. It's even been studied, and scientists even say that rejection, verbal rejection, is just as painful as a physical ailment.
Right.
Like, being cut or something. I mean, it's that sharp. And so she said that, and I was like, okay. And knowing that we were still going to do the study, and so went to bed. We did our thing. The next day, I come home, and Elisa comes out to me as I'm coming in through the door and says, "Yes, let's do it."
Now, in between there, I'd had my, come to Jesus moment.
Right.
I literally was, it's funny where God speaks to you, but here I am, doing laundry, very wife and mother thing to do. And I'm standing in our garage right in front of the dryer with a basket full of laundry and, almost the audible voice of God that says, are you really not even going to try?
Right.
Like, because if you're not, your marriage is over.
Right.
Right. Because it's not like he's asked you to, give up your firstborn or anything like that.
Right.
Like 60 days of sex. There are worse things to, for your husband to ask you. And so I was like, all right, I'm having this conversation with God. I'm like, but I don't want to. Like, I don't want to. Are you going to give up? Or are you going to do this? This whole wrestling thing. And so he comes home and I say yes. And, because I had conditioned him with rejection so much in our early marriage, I say yes. And he looks at me and is like, what are you saying yes to?
Because I had already gone on to the next thing.
You had anticipated that she was going to say no.
Oh, yeah. And so my mind is already going towards the next, like, where can we engage? How can I engage her so that way we can start working on us and on our marriage so we can grow? And so when she said yes, I was sort of taken aback. I'm like, yes to what? And, like, what are we talking yes to? And when she's like, the 60 days of sex challenge, I'm like, game on. At the same time, though, I'm thinking to myself, oh boy, like, where did I just put myself? Because now I'm thinking, am I able to perform? Like, as a man, as a husband, am I able to perform?
Yeah.
Am I going to be able to see this through? The commitment that we're going to make. And so we took time that night to just go, okay, what does this look like? What does a 60 days of sex challenge look like for us,
Right.
Tony and Alisa? And so we put up some parameters. You know, for us it was, if one of us is sick, if one of us is traveling, and time of the month. And so those were our parameters. And as our study started, we said, okay, we told our small group what we were doing. We're like,
Which was an interesting
which is-
conversation to tell.
to tell our small group
To tell,
study.
16 friends and strangers, hey, this is what we're doing for the next 8 weeks.
Right, but they were our accountability, and
Right.
it was fun because each week we had those folks there cheering us on, listening, but we were also sharing our revelation, what was happening in our own marriage from a place of, pretty much on zero.
Right.
I mean, we were pulling from those love tanks, pulling and not putting anything back in, to now we were filling each other up in different ways. It wasn't only about the physical act, but it was the emotional act, the financial acts,
Right.
The spiritual acts. And so that's where it all started. And we were lucky. We got 40 out of 60 days,
Awesome.
and have done numerous 7 days of sex challenges since then.
Right.
So
Did you guys also find too that you were a little bit more transparent with each other during that process, and you were able to kind of say a little bit more of what you were feeling when you were having the 60-day sex challenge?
yeah, and that's where it changed for us.
Absolutely.
It was the emotional intimacy, and that's what we really learned. Like the first 11 years of our marriage, we weren't emotionally connecting, so the sex was sort of like, okay, let's just do it and let's move on. Everybody says it's supposed to be good, but it really sort of isn't. We're here physically, but emotionally we're not involved. Spiritually we're not involved. And so through the 60 days, that's where we just started like, oh my gosh, there's an anticipation. We're talking to each other again about sex. One thing I learned with Alisa was that she at the time, with a 5 and a 2-year-old, pretty much primarily being at home, being a mom, being a wife, she didn't have a lot of outside folks that she was talking to. So for her, it was very important for me to sit there and just listen to her. So she would dump for like 30 minutes. And I just had to learn that, where before I'd just be like, let's have sex and let's get this over with. Let's roll. But she needed to let all those words out. She needed to let me know that I needed to let her know that I was listening to her, hearing her, loving on her. It wasn't just this, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, let's roll. It was, hey, I really hear you. And that still has transpired to this day.
Well, and I think, because we led with the intimacy piece, the sexual intimacy, certain things had to fall off. Like, I couldn't get upset if I had to be the one to take the garbage out, on a Thursday or whatever, because why am I going to be upset about that if I know we're having sex in a few hours? Right? Or, if we're asking each other to help around the house, we knew that the end goal was, let's be in a good frame of mind so that we can connect. And so there were things that started to break off of our marriage, in terms of, all the scorekeeping. Well, I did this, so now you need to do this. It's like, no, I did this so that we can be like ready to go in 2 hours.
Yeah.
Right.
He started helping more. The kids were little, and he started helping more. Why? Because we were having sex in a few hours. Let's make the house happy. And so there were all these different levels that we were connecting that we hadn't connected on. And, some people are like, well, it was just about the sex. I'm like, no. I go, the sex was just the beginning.
Right.
What that allowed us to do was to really make our marriage and make each other a priority, which all of a sudden, I don't even know if the first 11 years we'd had that sense of making each other a priority.
Right.
And so in doing that, it was like all of a sudden our marriage experienced transformation to the point where we're coming up on 20 years this year. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, my marriage is better now than it ever has been. And that's kind of an anomaly in today's day and age.
Yeah. Sex last night was good.
And there you go.
Love you.
And you know what the funny thing, and we're just keeping it real. And
Yeah.
the funny thing is, there's so many other couples who probably have the same description of their marriage,
Absolutely.
and they don't even realize they're in that state.
Mm-hmm.
And like hearing you guys talk about your story, and when it happened about, what was it, about like 7-8 years ago?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
About 7-8 years ago, and look at you today.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
and people think like, oh, when they get married, like our marriage is gonna be perfect. We're gonna have excellent communication. We're gonna have sex every night, and
And
not
we're
true.
only laughing because we know
We've
that's
been
what.
there.
Well, we've been there, but we also know that that's what Hollywood, that's what all the romance novels
Right.
lead us to believe. You know, you have an amazing wedding, you have the big party, all your friends come, it's great, and then the next day, well, you're gonna be married.
yeah,
And you're married for like the next 50, 60 years. But we make so much about getting to that wedding day. And then what happens after?
Yeah.
You know, more people are investing in the wedding day than they are in the marriage. And that's where we started. We said, like, we're going to have a great wedding. And we did. But we had no foundation for the first 11 years.
Right, and we've been conditioned to live in 30-minute increments, right? Like 30-minute sitcoms, right? So we see a sitcom, and in 30 minutes, we'll see a couple who may go through something, they discuss it, they go through the highs and the lows, and by the end, it's all made up, and everybody's
Yeah.
good and it's clean,
right.
right? And it could be from an emotional standpoint, it could be from a sexual standpoint. And unfortunately, life isn't like that. Marriage isn't like that. We don't live in 30-minute increments. You know, we live together going through this journey of marriage that happens every day, 24/7, 365 days a year,
Right.
year after year, year after year.
Right.
And so if our mind is set on that 30 minutes and it doesn't get resolved, then it's easy to check out and go, well, my husband, my wife, that they're not doing what needs to be done.
And I'm actually glad you went there, because I know we were talking over there before we started actually doing the shoot. We were talking about, you know, like porn. We were talking about outlets. So when your marriage is not going well, what do you turn to?
Right.
You know, and you had mentioned you didn't even realize that he was even doing that.
Right. I mean, I had known prior to getting married, you know, I knew that there'd been, you know, Penthouse magazine, you know, around.
Penthouse.
I mean, like you know,
old
we've been married
school.
20 years, so we're talking magazines
Right.
and things like that before the internet, before it was all over the phones, you know, before these types of things were as prevalent as they are today. And so I'd had some knowledge of it, but I didn't understand. And I think, you know, just in the work that we do with couples and the work that I do coaching, I hear it now. I didn't understand how pervasive it was in my marriage, and how Tony's addiction to pornography impacted virtually every facet of how he and I related to one another, be it through our sexual connection, because there were times when I was just a warm body because he
Right.
needed an outlet, to our emotional connection, you know, to the amount of time that he was spending, you know, in the garage on, you know, on the computer. Like, I'm like, well, he's just out there working. He's out there doing what, you know, and it wasn't like I was going out there to check on him. If he says I got to go work on something, he's got to go work on something.
Right.
You know, and yet there was this time gap that we were, you know, disconnect that we were experiencing, this emotional. And it wasn't until he said, you know what, this is what I've been doing, that I'm like, oh, light bulb. It was that light bulb moment of going, oh, maybe this
He came
is
to
why.
you.
He came
Oh,
to
yeah.
me.
Wow.
Yeah, that's where I had my God moment, because I was in my garage at the time where we had our computer set up, and my addiction to pornography started when I was 12 years old. That's when I first saw it,
Right.
with my buddies. This is, again, back in the day in the 80s when we had magazines, and that's where it grew from. And as technology changed, you know, I was probably one of those early adopters getting online, looking at videos and photos and all that. And so I was sitting in the garage one day, and I'm just looking at it. And Alisa, there's a wall, and then there's our living room, and Alisa is in there with our, at that point, 1-year-old. And I heard an audible voice from God, like, it's over. And I said, what's over? Like, what? And I'm sitting there just looking at pornography, and it's like, it's over. It's time to tell her. And so I had that decision to make, like, do I stop or do I continue doing what I'm doing? And so I decided to just walk through that door and tell Alisa where I had been and what had been going on. I didn't tell her the full story right there and then. I vowed to her, though, that it had to end.
Right.
And so we set up some guidelines, some guardrails of what was going to happen. And so I'm happy to say, though, that I've been porn free for 12 years now.
That is
and
amazing.
it truly has been just a miracle, because I don't have those images in my mind anymore. I mean, God seriously just came in and just said, enough's enough. And that began that transformation, you know, in my own soul, in my own body, to see Alisa as this beautiful woman that God has given me, you know, instead of making her into an image that I was seeing on the screen. And that's where that disconnect comes, where you know, us guys start portraying or putting on what we're seeing on the screen onto our wives. Believe me, they know it.
And then like that, the cartoons like a
Yeah, the little bubble, right? The little burst up here.
Right. And then I was like, we were talking about how like you get the thought and then it turns to action.
Right.
And then like we start treating our women like they're like toys.
Mm-hmm.
And then they know what we've been doing. They can tell.
Right.
My wife was like, oh yeah, I could tell. I was like, really? You could tell what? I could tell you probably looked at this. And I was like, no way. So it's more spiritual. It's a spiritual connection.
Yeah.
Right.
And I know we were talking about healthy sex life. Like, like now that you've kind of gotten past that, now that you have gotten past that addiction, what do you consider a healthy sex life now?
You know, that's a very unique thing for every couple, because depending on what their life circumstances are, you know, I mean, there's a frequency of sex. I mean, we do, you know, one of the things we talk about for our audience is the intimacy lifestyle.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is really, you know, Tony and I sat down and said, well, how often a week, given, you know, our kids, our businesses, our other obligations, how often a week do we want to be having sex?
Yeah.
And so we have our number. For us, it's, you know, minimum twice a week. And then the other part of that is that, you know, a healthy sex life isn't one person always initiating.
Yes.
Right, because the first part of the struggle we had the first 11 years is, you know, the only time I would ever initiate sex was on Tony's birthday, and maybe like he got lucky one other time during the year.
Right.
And it was like the birthday present, and he's like, okay, like I know what I'm getting this year for my birthday.
Or anniversary.
Maybe the anniversary, but sometimes I'm like, well, it's my anniversary too, you know,
Right.
that type of thing. And so I didn't initiate, and part of that was I never really had learned how to initiate sex.
Right.
And even when I thought I was initiating, because I'd never said, hey, if I do this, I'm initiating sex, this poor guy didn't know. So, you know, it became one of those things where when we implemented the intimacy lifestyle, we actually had to have a conversation. What does it look like when Alisa initiates sex? So if he gets the signal, he's not guessing, does this mean game on or game on, like, what's she doing? It's, oh, if she does this, I know where we're going with this.
Right.
So you just actually brought up something that many marriages struggle with: communication.
Yeah.
The communication piece is terrible
Yes.
with a lot of couples. You know, like I'll look at my wife like, hey, I'm posing, you know. What's
I'm ready.
and she's like, what are you doing? I'm trying to read a book. Like, this is my let's get it on pose.
Right.
Like, and she's like, no. But then like she'll be tugging and she'll tap me and she'll say something. I'm like, yeah, and I'm not getting the clue.
Right.
So obviously, communication is definitely important when it comes to initiating sex.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what you described. Like your mind was in a different place when you would initiate and he wouldn't even recognize it. And then I think men just put it out there.
but it's different. That's, you know, all of us are made differently, and so some guys aren't. Some
Right.
guys are like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. So we came up with something called 19 Questions to Amazing Sex.
Wow.
And so what we share all the time is, hey, if you want to have sex, we need to be discussing sex. And we need to be doing that way before we get into the bedroom in the heat of the moment. Right? Like, let's discuss, let's make sure we're discussing these topics, not in the heat of the moment, in our bedroom where we feel like there's pressure that we do something. Because, you know, it's okay to discuss these areas. It's about communication. It's about emotionally being involved with each other. And these are things that we had to learn as well. Alisa and I just didn't wake up one day and go, oh man, we're great at communicating with each other. No, we had to go through some awkward conversations
Oh, yeah.
multiple times to get to the point where we are today. And yet we believe that every little small step, every little baby step, we learn something new. And as we grow ourselves, you know, we're not the 23 and 22 year olds that we are
That we got married.
when we got married. I mean, we're in our 40s now, so life has changed.
But 40 is the new 30 though.
Right, that's what they keep saying. So I'm going to believe that.
We are owning that one.
We're
That is
owning
good.
that, yeah. But when we came up with 19 questions for amazing sex, that allowed us to start talking about it. All right, is oral sex something we want to do? If so, what does that look like? You know what I mean? How do, what was it
Just
like?
different positions and different rooms of the house. Like I tell people all the time, like God did not bless you with only a bedroom.
Right.
Yes.
Right? Most of us have houses that at least have like a bedroom and a kitchen, a living room and a bathroom. I mean, like we got the basics down.
A loft.
You got all kinds of good stuff, and every house is different. And, so like even to encourage couples, you know what, you don't just have to have sex in your bedroom. Right? Like,
go get the zebra rug and have it on the floor.
yeah, the zebra rug, trying a zebra rug.
Or the bear rug.
skin.
The bear
I'm
skin
like,
rug.
zebra's of course. You want like the llama.
The
Like,
llama, yeah, you can.
we were just in Peru,
So,
But
things like that.
getting out of these routines, because
Yeah.
a lot of couples, part of that lack of communication is because they're just doing the same thing over and over. So they're like, all right, well, we know it works, right? But it's not working.
Right.
Like maybe you're having sex, but you're not connecting.
Right.
And there's a huge difference between having sex and really being intimate.
Right.
So we were talking about younger couples who are starting out. They might have a kid or two.
Yeah.
Some might have 3 or 4 or 5. So we know they know how to have sex.
Yes.
But the question that I want to ask you guys is, for the mom that's at home, who is home all day with the kids, and the husband comes home, and he's tired from his day. Every moment of the day, he's like, look, I can't do it anymore. And the wife is trying to connect with the husband, which was kind of your story.
Right.
And you dumped on him like 30 minutes of, which happens to a lot of men. And, man, my wife just talks and talks about the day, and she don't know I had a rough day at work. How do you speak to a couple like that? Like when they have that situation, like they have all those excuses.
Yeah.
Well, you just used a key word right there. They're excuses.
Yes.
Because if it's important to you, you're going to find a way. And at one point in time, before all the kids, before all the obligations, before everything, when you were dating and courting each other, you were just as busy.
Yeah.
And you managed to find time. Like I remember when we were dating, we would have like 3-hour conversations on a regular basis. I mean,
On the phone.
On the phone.
Yeah. This is back in the day though too. We had to pay for long distance.
we're 22 years together. We got a whole like technology journey between the two
You
of
guys
us.
go all the way back to college.
Yes.
Yeah, we do go back to college, and so for that couple, it's almost been oversaid, but we still state it all the time: is that you've got to carve out that time.
Right.
If he's working all day, he is exhausted. But guess what? So is she.
That's right.
And that's not an excuse to not connect, because at the end of the day, especially if you do have kids, you're setting the example for what marriage is going to look like for your grandchildren. Right? Because everything that you do in your marriage is going to be replicated in the next generation. So if you're too busy to connect, if you're too busy or too tired to have sex, if you're just ignoring your spouse, that's what your kids are learning. And your grandkids are going to see that. So do you want your grandkids to grow up in a house where their mom and dad aren't connecting? I mean, our kids are growing up in a house where, Tony thinks nothing when the kids' friends are over coming and, giving me a big kiss or hugging me or touching me. And we tend to be a little bit more affectionate. We both grew up in very affectionate families. But that sense of touch, that sense of making time, I mean, our kids know, case in point, last night was date night. Daughter went to the gym, open house. We've got a 13-year-old that can stay home by himself. We're like, we got 2 hours. We're going out, and our kids know date night is sacred. You have to be in the hospital for mom and dad to cancel date night. I mean, that's about where it comes to. And the other thing I would say to that busy couple is 10 or 15 minutes can make all the difference. You don't have to have a date night. You don't have to have 3 hours. 10 minutes where the two of you are like, hey, Bruce, how was your day?
Yeah.
What challenge did you have today? Hey, what successes did you have today? If your wife asks you where you slayed the dragon, and you get to come back to her and say, this is what I did, and you get to puff up your chest a little bit, and you're like, she wants to know where I was successful.
That's right.
And all of a sudden you're like, I'm gonna go slay that dragon again tomorrow, because you know what? She had a big smile on her
That's
face.
right.
And it's not like, oh well, the kids did this, or the kids did that, and you're like, okay, great, the kids, where did we connect?
Now you mentioned about grandkids, and I'm thinking about legacy.
Right.
Very much.
I'm thinking about legacy because it's not just the kids in the home, but it goes down to the grandkids.
Absolutely.
So whatever's learned in the home, it can replicate itself to another generation. And I think that's really important that you said that, because we're talking about commitment too.
Yes.
Because marriage is a strong commitment, and people need to see commitment more than ever in today's age. We have one of the highest success rates. Not success rates, but the divorce rate is probably at the highest it's ever been ever, and people are not seeing real commitment. What do you guys consider real commitment?
Wow.
Mike, you go, because I've got a few answers as well.
Do you? Commitment to me is realizing that when we said I do, that the journey wasn't. Nobody said the journey was going to be easy.
Right.
And so the real commitment to me is being able to stand up and saying, hey, you know what? We're going through a tough time. And I'm not just going to flee because we're going through a tough time. Now, the one caveat that Alisa and I always say is that if you're in a physically abusive relationship, you're in an emotionally abusive relationship, you have somebody who's addicted to drugs and alcohol, and they just can't get away, from that right now, protect yourself. Yeah. You have to. Too often, folks feel like, man, I'm in a physically abusive relationship, and everybody's telling me I got to stay in this commitment.
Right.
You need to protect yourself, because we don't want you to get hurt any further.
Right.
But if we're going through just life, right? I mean, Alisa and I lost a child, and that's life. It's tough.
Yeah.
Right? But the commitment is staying in it and going, I'm still going to love you through this time. I'm going to love on you. Now, that love for me isn't this feeling of butterflies and unicorns. It's a different one. It's a love in action.
Right.
It's a verb. It's me just, protecting Alisa, trying to figure out where can I serve her in this time where she's alone and depressed and not herself.
Right.
And so too often I think we're really ready just to flee instead of sticking through those times.
Well, and I think, two things. One is that right now, you talk about that high divorce rate. It's because we've bought into this idea that we're supposed to be happy all the time.
Yeah.
And if I'm not happy, one, it's your responsibility to make me happy.
That's right.
And so if I'm not happy, that must mean you're not doing something. So I'm going to go find someone else who's going to make me happy. And the truth of the matter is that it's not Tony's responsibility to make me happy.
And you're still bringing your junk to the next one.
Yeah, I mean, you
anyways.
carry, but it's my responsibility to make me happy.
Right.
It's my responsibility to do what I need to do. Now, if there are some things that I would like him to do differently, it's my responsibility to communicate that to him. But my happiness is not an excuse to get out of this relationship. Or my lack of happiness, I should say, is not an excuse.
Right.
Because too many people are like, well, I'm not happy. I'm checking out. And the truth of the matter is, I mean, you shared with us that you've got young kids. Their feelings will change on a dime.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
They get an ice cream cone,
man.
they're happy. The ice cream cone starts to melt, you got a tantrum on your hand.
That's right.
10 seconds.
Right.
Right? So instead of just saying, honey, lick the side of your ice cream cone, right? Take an action. As adults, we're saying, well, my ice cream's melting. I'm out of here. Right? Instead of saying, do something about it.
Right.
And one of the big actions that we had to take was we got to a point where we said, you know what, divorce is not an option for us. So if divorce is not an option, then we better make sure that all of our actions line up with that decision. That means I'm not going to put myself in situations that are going to jeopardize my marriage. That means I'm not going to have friendships with people that are going to jeopardize my marriage. That means I'm not going to make decisions that are going to jeopardize this relationship.
Right.
But it's a decision. And we have to, commitment is honoring your decisions.
I like that. And I know I went on your website, and I know you guys have this the 6 questions, like the 6 forms of intimacy. Tell us a little bit about the 6 forms of intimacy.
So 6 forms of intimacy are your emotional intimacy, your spiritual intimacy, your financial intimacy, recreational intimacy, physical intimacy, and your sexual and intellectual intimacy. And so you have 6. What ended up happening, and we saw this a lot, everybody's like, well, I want better intimacy, which really means that they just want better sex, right? Those 2 words have basically been connected together now. Intimacy equals sex. But there are 6 forms that we need to be working on and touching on in our marriage, so that way we have the sexual intimacy we desire or want. And so as we look at each one of those, we look at it as a wheel, and each one of those is a spoke. Right? And so you have 6 of them, and how are you doing? If you were able to sit there right now, draw a wheel, hub, put 6 spokes on it, put the different intimacies on it, where is it? You know, from a 1 to a 10. You know, if you look at your emotional intimacy and you're like, well, the last time I talked to my wife was 3 days ago.
Yes.
It's probably like a 1 or a 2. You know, if your sexual intimacy and you're having frequent sex and it's a good part, it's vibrant, well, it's probably a 10. You know, recreational intimacy, that's sort of the dating, that's those activities we do together. Could be a physical activity, walking, kayaking, could be mind activities like games, chess, gin rummy, card games, stuff that you do together. That's a 1. Like if you can't remember the last time you did a date together,
Right.
That's a problem.
And so you look at your wheel and you're going, wow, it's a little broken. I'm a cyclist. I've been road cycling since I was 14. If a spoke goes out, guess what? Your wheel is out of true, and it's going to hit the brake pad. So you're gonna have like a little lump every time you go around. Same thing. And so as we look at each one of those, we try to look at those in our own marriage, and for couples that Alisa coaches or we work with, going, okay, where are you on that wheel? Because if you're low in your emotional intimacy, then we need to start connecting there. We need you guys to figure out and give you tools and tips so that you can start connecting in that area.
And I was just going to say, Bruce, the R6 questions that you mentioned, that's a tool, a resource that's available on our website. Yes. Where, part of what's happening, you mentioned communication a few minutes ago, is that we've stopped talking to each other. If it's not the mundane, hey, did you get the milk on the way home, or Johnny's got a soccer game, or we're going to the Jones house on Saturday for a party, we're not having those like, hey, what's going on with you conversations.
Yeah.
And so our 6 questions is literally that. It's 6 questions just to help couples start that conversation again.
Mm-hmm.
And so it becomes that resource. I mean, one of the things we want to do is we want to be able to resource couples to say, okay, you know what, if we're not where we want to be, how do we get to extraordinary?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that's what that resource becomes.
Yeah.
Tony and Alisa have been amazing. They've been doing an amazing job with the interview. They have so many great resources available. They have the #1 marriage. Let me say it again. The #1 marriage podcast on iTunes. You need to check them out, subscribe to their channel. Also, they have books available. I have some here. One's called, and I think this is something that a lot of us might need to buy. It's called The 6 Days of Sex Challenge. And then they have another one called Strip Down. Don't strip down right now. But no, Strip Down. So they have resources. They have about 3 other books on their website that you can check out. Please check out their website. It's www.oneextraordinarymarriage.com. That's www.oneextraordinarymarriage.com. I want to thank you guys for joining us for the interview today. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. I hope you got something out of this whole session here. If you have questions, please hit the comment section. Also, you can hit me up personally on BW the Marriage Guy on Facebook, Instagram. You can also hit me up on Twitter. We're on Periscope. Hey, you can hit them up too. But thank you guys for joining us today. We'll see you next time.